يمكنش قدر صح؟
Yes, yes, inshallah.
سوى
إحسان. طيب، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you all in this new episode of the classes or the sessions on commenting on Hadith Jibreel alayhi salam. We are now at the part of the Hadith where Jibreel alayhi salam is asking the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam the third question, the third of 5 questions, and that is concerning al-ihsan. What is al-ihsan? قال أخبرني عن الإحسان. Oh Muhammad, tell me about al-ihsan. And we will come shortly, inshallah, as to the reason why this is asked or how it's appropriate. But we spent some time in the previous session where we reflected in the meaning of the word al-husn. Al-husn from hasuna. Al-ihsan comes from the root word hasuna, which means for something to be beautiful, attractive, such that the soul finds joy in looking at it. The soul finds joy in looking at it or interacting with it. That is what hasuna, something beautiful, that when you look at it, you find it appealing, attractive, such that the soul will find some joy and comfort and sweetness in interacting with it. And they say hasuna al-shay'u, something has become beautiful like that. And we spoke yesterday, in last week, we spoke about this important tarbiyah related point. We reflected quite deeply in something was like a gem that I think every one of us should cherish that point, which is the derived from the words of Imam al-Asbahani, al-Raghib al-Asbahani, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his precious book, Mufradatu al-Fadhi al-Quran. You know, he has a book of tafsir, you can call it, but it's more like a dictionary for the words that occurred in the Quran. Only for the words that occurred in the Quran. It's a very precious book, and his commentary in that book is amazing. It's called Mufradat al-Fadhi al-Quran, Mufradatu al-Fadhi al-Quran. When he spoke about husn, he highlighted that husn, beauty, is something that can be detected or observed by either the intellect, the aql, you know, and the other word for it in Arabiya is al-basira, you know, the spiritual, intellectual capacity is called al-basira, being able to see and understand and comprehend things. So there's a beauty that can be observed through the aql. And there's also, he says, mustahsanun min jihati al-hawa, something that is attractive or appealing because it's consistent with the intrinsic built-in natural instincts and desires. You know, you are created with the desire of food, for example. You like food, you like to drink, you like to wear nice, you like to protect yourself, you like to be appreciated, you like to be valued. All these are intrinsic feelings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has built with us. This is called al-hawa. And al-hawa in itself is not bad. It's only used in bad connotation because most of the time, more likely than not, people fail to control these intrinsic desires. You know, they don't allow it to be used in a balanced way. They always allow it to overflow, if you like, overflow and take charge of their lives. So ittiba'ul hawa, the word hawa means following the natural intrinsic traits and qualities which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has built within us, like seeking to be protected, like seeking to be loved, like seeking to be with somebody, like seeking to be part of a group, like seeking to eat well and drink well and sleep comfortably. All these desires are built in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built it within us because of some benefit that we can gain out of it. There is a lot of benefit that we can gain out of it, which will help us in the pursuance of our purpose in this dunya, to build this earth. However, al-hawa, the word al-hawa, even though it refers to these intrinsic natural desires, because most of the time it is people lack control over it. So you find the word hawa is used in a negative connotation. In a negative connotation. Even in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى. Whoever fears or observes Allah's watchfulness over them, right? And they deny the nafs its hawa. Right? So the hawa here is used in a negative sense, because most of the time people fail to control it. So given the hawa of the nafs can observe certain things and find them beautiful and attractive. Why? Because it's just consistent with what it desires. Right? Also, mustahsanun, he says, mustahsanun min jihati al-hiss, something that you look and see and you find appealing, may not be necessarily related to your intrinsic desires. Like, for example, you can look at a castle, for example, and say, wow, beautiful. You look at a river, for example, or a garden, piece of garden, or something that isn't related to your thing. So al-hiss, something you observe, either with your eyes, with your hands, you touch it, whatever. So he said these are the three areas with which we observe beauty: the intellectual beauty, the beauty relating to the natural intrinsic desires, al-hawa, and then beauty that are related to physical sensations, something that you feel and touch. Right? He says most average people, when they speak about beauty, the only type of beauty they have access to or they know is the physical beauty, something that they only sense with their physical senses. They see, they touch, they hear. This is the beautiful things for them. فيقال, he says, it will be said, رجل حسن. This is a beautiful man, a good-looking man, a handsome man. وحسان or وحسان. وامرأة حسناء. This is a beautiful woman. They will describe as being حسناء. طيب وحسانة. طيب. However, he says أكثر ما جاء في القرآن من الحسن فللمستحسن من جهة البصيرة. When Allah speaks about beauty in the Quran, it speaks to the beauty that appeals to the intellect. It speaks to the beauty that appeals to the intellect. And we've established in the previous class that the joy and the sweetness that the soul experiences from the beauty that the mind experiences or the mind finds is a lot more than any other type of beauty. Let me say it one more time. Every time you observe a beauty, anything beautiful, right, your soul finds it comfortable. And you'll find your soul finds sweetness and pleasure in observing that beauty. That's why they call it mubhijun. If something is beautiful, they say this is beautiful, meaning delightful to look at. It brings delight into the heart, right? When you observe anything beautiful. However, having said that, there are a number of beauties or three categories of beauty. The highest one that gives the most level of joy and sweetness is that beauty that is observed by the aql, by the mind. Notions, ideas, principles, thoughts. Somebody can love a thought and the sensation of joy and happiness that your soul will experience as a result of discovering that or making that realization is much more than anything that you can gain from joy and delight by experiencing physical beauty. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, that the average person has no access to this type of beauty. They have no access to this type of beauty. The knowledgeable people, they are in another level. And that's why average people, a layman, they don't understand why some scholars or students of knowledge seem to be like nutters. What are you doing, spending all this time just reading books from one book to another, from one book to another, and not enjoying us when we go for food, enjoying us when we go for watching a football game or doing this or that. What are you doing? They don't understand. In fact, some of them may actually feel sorry for the scholars, and the people who are engrossed in knowledge. They think that we feel sorry for you. They take pity on the person because they feel that this person is missing out on a lot of pleasure. And the reality is they are the ones who are missing out. And guess what? There is nothing you can say to make these people appreciate what they haven't seen. It is something that you only experience when you actually experience it. And the reason why I felt that it is important for us to dwell on that idea is because it's one of the greatest reasons for tazkiyah, one of the greatest means of tazkiyah, the purification of the heart and the development of the soul, the self-control, the self-discipline can be expedited a lot by understanding this. Change how you observe beauty. What is your definition of beauty? What do you find attractive? And allow yourself to find beauty in ideas. Allow yourself to find beauty in ideas. You'll find that the tazkiyah journey, your journey of tazkiyah, the purification of the heart, the self-control, the self-discipline, will become a lot more easier for you, and you can speed the process. Because if your nafs experiences that joy that comes from knowing, realizing, therefore the nafs will become less desperate to find joy and happiness and delight in physical experiences. A lot of our difficulties when we try to develop ourselves is because we find our souls so clinging on the physical beauties, physical beauty of a woman, physical beauty of a food, physical beauty of a sound, it's something that you like to hear, physical beauty of companionship and gathering. These are physical things, huh? And the soul would like to develop joy, would like to feel joy and delight and happiness. So the reason why we are lagging and not developing fast, because we keep on dragging the soul, and the soul is clinging to these sort of things. If we can let the soul find pleasure and joy in ideas and notions, then the soul will become less dependent on physical beauty. And therefore, we can bring it with us to enjoy this journey. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the reason why we are lagging and we find it difficult, because we know the soul hasn't yet experienced the sweetness of ideas and notions. If we do that, then our tazkiyah will become a lot more faster and a lot more easier. And also, the hawa, this is point number 2, on why we should see intellectual beauty as a means for tazkiyah. Number 2, the more you experience beauty, intellectual beauty, the more you will adjust the taste of your soul. You will adjust the taste of your soul. When you are used to eating some low quality food, right? And then somebody gives you high quality food all of a sudden, right? What you used to be content with previously, you will no longer be content with. So the soul that hasn't experienced the joy of Iman, the joy of notions and ideas and principles, will find contentment in just eating a good meal or sleeping nicely or having a good laugh. These are the kind of things that the soul will be content with. But allow the soul to taste that higher level of nourishment, much more beautiful sort of spiritual food, then the soul will no longer look back and find that thing beautiful anymore. So the soul that used to struggle, oh, I am clinging onto this thing, it will no longer become clinging to it because it loses desire to it. When you have what? When you have adjusted its taste. When you adjust the taste of your soul you will no longer find bahja or surur, delight and joy in the physical beauty. And that's why the ulama, you hear of a lot of ulama, yeah, they haven't got married. They haven't gotten married. They lived this entire life, and they never had any problem with not being with a woman, and they are physically as macho as any man can be, right? But now they have another level of taste, and that made their instinctual desires suppressed. They became under control. Why? Because they're so overwhelmed with the beauty of ideas, the beauty of the journey, the beauty of the mission, the beauty of the purpose. So the people who have no ideas over this, you'll find them, subhanAllah, struggling with desires, so that is one of the ways of getting rid of bad desires. I was recently speaking to a brother who was telling me that يعني أكيد going back to this bad habit of porn and self-pleasuring, and I don't know how to come out of it. He said it led me from dark place to another dark place. It messed up my family, it messed up my work, my mental state. It really messed me up. And this, I told you, this is the advice. Try to see if you can make your soul find pleasure in superior things, such that it will become less desperate for the physical pleasure. Right? Point number 3 is, when you've experienced really beautiful things, ugly things become uglier in your eyes. Ugly things become uglier in your eyes. Or if things that you see normal, which are not normal, sinful things, bad things, immoral things, when a person is immersed in them, they don't see the true ugliness of them. But if you keep on developing your sense of beauty, the more you develop your mind, the more ugly that thing will look in your eyes. And therefore, you will no longer desire it. Does that make sense? Right? Let me give you an example. If you imagine somebody who is, I don't know, in a dark room in prison, or in a mucky or in a muddy situation, very filthy place, very smelly, dark, no ventilation, and living a wretched life in there, right, for a prolonged period of time. With the passing of time, this person will lose any feeling of how bad his situation is, will begin to accept. That's the norm. He becomes desensitized from it. But imagine if this person, you take him out of this prison cell, right, and you take him to the most beautiful and wondrous place. Like imagine one of the palaces of kings, or one of the palaces of rich people, gardens, flowers, roses, river streams, wells, bird chipping, and rabbits, squirrels going that, beautiful sight. They see the sunshine. Imagine if you then bring them back to where they were. How will they feel?
Depressed.
They will become even more depressed than how you were before, because before they were accepting the situation, because they haven't experienced what it feels to be in such delightful place. So when you take them to a delightful place, they begin to see the ugliness of what they were upon. Right? So the ulama, they say, the soul will begin to notice the ugly nature of its bad habits. And then departing away from it becomes a lot easier for the person of intellectual experiences, or having having experienced the intellectual beauty. طيب. Also, learning this, understanding that there is something extremely beautiful at the end of this road, the road of seeking knowledge. It can be, and that's benefit number 4, it can be one of the strongest motivations and incentives for one to persist in seeking Islamic knowledge. A lot of the times, we want to seek knowledge because of the virtue of it, but we don't know what do we actually get out of it in this dunya, the fulfillment of the duty, but we don't realize that there is nothing out there that is sweeter than the path that you're on. And therefore, you will be able to persist in the path of seeking Islamic knowledge, and you will work very hard. And also, you will be more than happy to put all the sacrifices that are needed to attain that knowledge. You know, you will be able to put in your sacrifice time of sleep, sacrifice time of pleasure, sacrifice money, travel abroad, and sacrifice your work, because you know what you're going to get at the end of this road is really worth it. Okay? So when you begin experiencing the pleasure of knowledge, then you will become like this. You'll become ready. So a lot of us are struggling with knowledge because we don't know what are we going to get at the end of it. The ulama, they said, in fact, the more you experience intellectual beauty, the less you will enjoy physical beauty. The more you find spiritual and intellectual beauty, and the more you enjoy of that, the less you will find physical beauty attracts you. And what I mean by physical beauty, every type of intrinsic natural desires, you'll find them less entertaining. But then it goes also the other way around. You need to allow yourself to experience to starve or to fast from physical attraction, from physical beauty, so that it can aim for the spiritual and intellectual beauty, right? And that's why the ulama, they say, the more you indulge in the physical beauty, the less likely you are to experience intellectual thoughts, intellectual beauty. Right? So somebody who eats a lot, drinks a lot, they are not likely to experience intellectual beauty. So the less you do of the physical experiences, the more likely you are to experience the upper level of happiness and joy from intellectual sources. Right? And that's why the ulama, they say this is the reason why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted or invited Musa alayhi salam to come to the Mount of Tur to speak to him, he told him that he needs to fast 30 days first. And after fasting 30 days, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prolonged this or extended this by another 10 days. For him to be able to experience the ultimate level of beauty, the beauty of speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and relish every second of it, you need to reduce a little bit of the physical beauties and the physical experiences. So fasting, that's why in Islam, why do we fast? Because they go in this, there's like, they go in opposite direction. The more you experience physical beauty, the less you'll experience the spiritual and intellectual beauty. If you reduce your experiences from the physical beauty, you will become more likely to experience the spiritual and the intellectual beauty.
Would that be when you're focusing less on the pleasures of food and drink, then you are able to restrain, and more self-discipline allows you
and then the soul will be able to contemplate on beautiful ideas. Okay? But the more you indulge, the more the soul will become clinging onto the physical things. Listen to this hadith, this amazing hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, narrated. It's a hadith saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, recorded by Bukhari and Muslim, narrated by Imran ibn al-Husayn radiyallahu anhu. He said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, خيركم or خير القرون قرني, the best of all generations is this generation, the people who are living with me. ثم الذين يلونهم, then the people who come after them, the following generation, then the people who come after them. Okay? Then the narrator says, I don't know how many times he said that, 2 or 3 times, the following generation. So basically there is this succession. The more the generations go away from the time of the Prophet, the less goodness, the less quality they are. Right? And in another hadith, the Prophet, he says that the hour will only begin or rise on the worst of all people. So the quality of people will keep on receding and becoming less and less and less and less until the day of judgment will rise on the worst of all the creation. In this hadith, the Prophet, he says, the best of all generations, the best of all people are the people in my time, my era, and then those who follow, those who come after them, then those who come after them, and then he says, ثم يكون بعدهم قوم. Then after that, after the 3 generations, we will begin to experience a people, a quality of people. He says, يشهدون ولا يستشهدون. يشهدون. They will give testimony when they weren't asked in the first place. Or they will give false testimony. They don't understand the ugliness of giving false testimony. And they become so notorious for giving false testimony that people don't ask them for testimony because they know they're liars. So what are the quality? He says, يشهدون ولا يستشهدون. They give testimony and no one wants their testimony. Bad people, immoral people. Then he says, ويخونون ولا يؤتمنون. They betray people and no one trusts them. وينذرون ولا يفون. They take oaths. They do another, you know. They take oaths on themselves. They say, I swear I will do this if that happens, but they never fulfill their promises. وينذرون ولا يفون. And then he says, listen, after listing all the negative things, he says, ويظهر فيهم السمن. And then you will begin to see in them one apparent characteristic is that they become fat people. They are fat people. People with a lot of obesity, a lot of weight, you know. So look how he associated these two together. Immoralities, bad characteristics, bad character. And then at the end of the hadith, he says, you will see them, and you will see them people who are overweight and obese. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, commenting on this, he says, what is meant by a siman here is to have a lot of samin, to be overweight, basically. طيب, he says, المذموم منه المستكسب. المذموم, the one that is dispraised of being fat, is that which is resulted from overindulging, not that which results from the genes or the natural characteristics of the biology of the body. There are people who are naturally, they incline to put on weight. That's not the one. This is not the thing that is being dispraised. What is dispraised is people who have so much desire for food. They eat a lot, they drink a lot, they indulge a lot, they end up being overweight. This is their characteristic. He says, المذموم منه من يستكسبه وأما من هو فيه خلقة فلا يدخل في هذا الذنب. One who is naturally inclined towards being, like their digestive system or whatever it is that in their body that causes them hormones or whatever it is that causes them to become fat, that's another thing. لكن المكتسب, the one that actually does things that cause them to become fat. What is that? He says, المتكسب له هو المتوسع في المأكول والمشروب. The one that overindulges in food, drink, trying this, trying that, this dessert, that cake, this meat and that meat, this type of rice, that type of rice. They relish every type of food, and they have taste for it. This is the type of people who will lose their morality. Do you see how the correlation is between overindulging with physical attraction, physical and beautiful beauties, if you like, and realizing the ugliness of these actions? Do you see the link between the two? Right? The more you are able to experience a beautiful intellectual beauty, the more you will see these actions as ugly, and you will no longer want to be attributed by that. You will no longer be wanting to engage in these kind of actions. So the point here is they neglected their intellectual nourishment, and they indulged as a result. They indulged in the only type of beauty they can indulge in, which is the physical attraction, the physical beauty. And as a result, their actions also became ugly. Their taste of what is beautiful and what's ugly was affected as a result of that. So again, I say to you, the more, if you want to speed up your ability to progress and develop your person as a person, as a believer, to become a better believer, try to appreciate the beauty of notions, the beauty of concepts, the beauty of stances that the believers take, You know, you read a story and you just dwell on that idea, see how amazing that story is. The more of these kind of stories, noble stories that you read, whether in the Quran or the Sunnah or in the Seerah, the more you will feel attracted to that. You feel like, I would like to be like this. And the more you feel like you would like to be like that, the less you will be inclined towards being something opposite of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the ulama, they say, there is an opposite. These two things, they go in opposite direction. طيب. Number 6, we said, for a person who have begun to experience intellectual beauty and find joy, that level of joy, that level of delight of the soul from experiencing and being able to see things, understand things, that person will not want to risk losing that. Right? And that will be one of the strongest reasons that will prevent you from sinning. Because you realize that when you sin, the first thing that will be extinguished is what? The light of your heart. The insight, the basira will be extinguished, as if you have allowed it to be wind to blow on your candle, the candle of your light, of your heart. Okay? So for a person who have experienced the delight and the joy of the soul from knowledge, it will become one of the strongest incentives for them to not want to ever lose this again. Okay? So they call this طمس البصيرة. طمس البصيرة. The basira, the aql, the intellect that can actually understand things and see and observe intellectual beauty is called al-basira. For that basira to be matmus or tumisat, to be in a state whereby it can no longer see. It can no longer see, where the light is gone, the flare of that fire is gone. Right? How does it happen? What's the correlation between sinning and not being able to understand things anymore? You remember we once read in Ibn al-Qayyim's works that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, if he was to read a mas'ala, an issue, and he does not understand it, he will try his best. But if he get to a point where he no longer is able to go beyond a certain limit, he will leave his book and he will engage in istighfar, and he will do it 100 times, 200 times, 1,000 times. And then when he goes back to his book, all of a sudden he can understand it. He can see what happens, what's going on in that mas'ala. You see, so he has understanding that the light of his heart, of his mind, was extinguished by some sin. And for him to be able to understand, he needs to seek forgiveness. Okay? So what is the relationship between one's ability to understand and sinning?
The more you sin, the less you understand.
Yes, but why? Why is that the case? Why is it that the more one sins, the less they are able to understand things, and therefore the less they are able to enjoy the joy of knowing?
The less self-awareness.
Huh?
The more you sin, the more you lose your self-awareness.
The ulama, they said,
And God conscious.
listen to this analogy they gave. They said the heart is like the body, just exactly like the body. In what way? In the same way, when the body is sick and unwell, how that body will lose its appetite, for food. It can no longer, the body will no longer desire food. It has no appetite to it. And then it will also turn away from it. As we see from sick people, you try to give them food, you try to give them soup, whatever you try, whatever they desire, they don't have the appetite for it. And they said, and if they force themselves to eat, they will not find it palatable. They will not find it enjoyable in their tongue. It will be like sour, and they will not find any sweetness or any pleasure in eating it. And benefit-wise, they will hardly benefit from any type of food. They will hardly benefit from any type of food. And that is why the body, when you put food inside and the body is not ready to benefit from it, what happens to it? It gets rejected. The body is saying, right now, I am not in the position of benefit from any food. You give a sick person any food, what does the body do? They retch it. They bring it back. It's the body saying that whatever I take in now, I am not going to be able to benefit from it. And that's why when one goes to an A&E, what do? They give them the drips. That's food through the vein. Why? Because the body is unable to take any food now. Any food it gives it, it will reject it. Right? So the ulama, the same thing applies to the heart. When the heart becomes ill, it will lose appetite for any nourishment, any intellectual nourishment. It will not desire it. It will not want to have it. It will turn away from it. And if you try to force it, if you try to force yourself to have it, you will not find any pleasure for it. It will not be palatable. You read a page of the Quran, you read a page of the book, when before you used to have a lot of sweetness in reading something, now you no longer have the pleasure for it. And just like how the body also reject the food, the heart also can get to a point where it rejects the intellectual nourishment. They said even the heart can be worse than the body in certain cases, because unlike the body, the heart can change its nature and develop a desire for something that hurts it. The heart, different to the body, it can develop a desire. So it lost desire for intellectual beneficial things, but then it develops the opposite type of desire for something harmful. And in fact, I think even we see it in the physical world as well. Have you seen people who are so ill, they have cancer, they have all sorts of lung problems, and they just go out and still have another cigarette, knowing that this is going to kill them, but they still have it. And if you ask them to have a proper meal, they say, oh, I don't have appetite for it. Have you seen this? The same thing applies to the soul. The same thing applies to the heart. And the ulama who know this, they take a covenant with themselves that they will never put themselves in this position, in a position whereby they read a book and they don't find pleasure to it. They don't benefit from it, or their souls turn away from it. Okay? So one of the strongest reasons for the ulama not to sin is understanding this concept of tamsul basira. When the basira becomes extinguished, no more light, no more flare in the heart, they say this is something I don't want to risk ever. And that's why one of the reasons they have to never sin or try their best not to fall into sins is that. So this is one of their incentives for never sinning. Why? Because they don't want to be parting from the sweetness of what they have experienced. Is that making sense? The reason why the people of knowledge, and they don't have, I'm not necessarily speaking about scholars, even an average person, when you experience that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you start to feel that as I have sweetness in the dhikr of Allah, in qira'at al-Quran, in supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is so much pleasure in that. When you experience it, you need to protect it. And if you are mindful about this concept of tamsul basira, the extinction of the light of the heart, then you will not risk it. You will not risk it. Okay? Let's think of this hadith, the hadith of, I would call it the hadith of the sweetness of knowledge, the sweetness of intellectual ideas, halawatul iman, the sweetness of iman. Hadith recorded by Imam Bukhari, narrated by Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anh. He mentions the hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaks about the sweetness of iman. And that's the beauty of ideas and knowledge that results in pleasure. He says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ثلاث من كن فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان. 3 characteristics. Whoever has them, you can see that this person is enjoying the sweetness of iman. What are they? The characteristics. He says, number 1, أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهم. They love Allah and the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam more than anything else. They will never put anything before Allah and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why would you think that that's the case? because they got so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they know Allah so well, that they started to find the sweetness of who Allah is. The knowledge of Allah is so sweet, you know. And also when they look at any human being, any creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't find anything more beautiful and more attractive than Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And as such, they love Allah and Rasulullah so much that nothing gives them any more pleasure than Allah and His Messenger. So that's when halawatul iman comes in, you know. And then he says, وأن يحب المرأة, the second characteristic, أن يحب المرأة لا يحبه إلا لله. If they love anyone, they only love for the sake of Allah. They no longer love for money, or because of that person being beautiful or handsome or good looking or attractive physically, or because of wealth, or because they make them feel safe, they make them feel loved, they make them feel appreciated. No, no, no. Alas, all these things, they drop them. They're no longer interested in the physical beauty. They love people for what? Because of ideas. They love a person for the sake of Allah. Right? And then number three, which is the most relative to what we were talking about here, he says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, وأن يكره أن يعود في الكفر كما يكره أن يقذف في النار. You know, to hate, to be, to return to kufr, to disbelief, to hate, to return to disbelief, to go back to the darknesses after they have tasted the sweetness. You know, to hate that, just as they hate to be thrown in the fire of hell. This is an expression to show you that this person, there is nothing that is more dreadful for them than losing the sweetness of the iman they are experiencing. Does that make sense? So this is what happens when a person experiences the sweetness of what? Of iman. And what's iman? Iman is things you believe in, ideas, notions about Allah, about Rasulullah, about the creation of Allah, about the mastery of Allah, the power of Allah, the knowledge of Allah. You are so impressed that you keep on wondering, you know. So in short, what we said about ihsan and husn, and the difference between physical beauty and the pleasure and joy that the soul gets out of it, versus the pleasure and joy the soul gets out of intellectual beauty. There's no comparison, you know. And we quoted a verse from the Quran last week from Surah Taha. Anyone remembers the verse? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَمُدَّنَّ عَيْنَيْكَ إِلَى مَا مَتَّعْنَا بِهِ أَزْوَاجًا مِّنْهُمْ زَهْرَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا لِنَفْتِنَهُمْ فِيهِ وَرِزْقُ رَبِّكَ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. He says, don't look away, O Muhammad. You know, when you try to find solace and patience. Remember, we said that in the context in which this ayah was revealed, Allah is telling the Prophet فَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا يَقُولُونَ. Be patient on the harm they are, and the accusations and the insult they are throwing at you, O Muhammad. You know, and have patience on the fact that they are rejecting you. Where do you find solace? You know, this is what the soul does. When you go through hardships, and when you go through difficulties, you need something to compensate you for the lack of comfort, the lack of sweetness, the lack of joy. Right? So when we go through stress, when we go through hardships, the soul immediately tries to find what? To find other source where it can find joy and delight in. Right? And going back to the topic of this brother who was struggling with, masturbation and porn and stuff like this, in my sessions with him, he actually made the realization that he only desires this act when he's stressed. You know, he's been through divorce and havoc, yani. He's currently in courts with family. He says, I hate the notion of a woman at the moment. I have no desire for a woman, right? But I have desire for this deed, for this act. So he says, I realize it's not to do with the desire for women. Something else is making my soul yearn for it. What is it? The relief, the hardship, the stress. When one is stressed, the soul will naturally look for other ways of finding comfort and solace. And when a person indulges in this, the soul realizes that this is a good source to find relief from this problem. So when a person becomes stressed like this, the first notion that comes to the mind is what? That deed. So, and if a person is living a stressful life, what's going to happen? This desire will be always in the mind. Is it because it's a pleasurable desire? No, it's not. It's harmful, it's negative, it's sinful, it's ugly, it's very degrading, right? But because the mind have gotten used to this idea, when I'm stressed, I use this, right? So going back to this ayah, this hadith, when the Prophet ﷺ was so stressed out by the fact that these disbelievers, they rejected him and they threw all these accusations at him, Allah told him to be patient. Be patient upon what they're telling you, and instead find solace in what? Sabbih bihamdi rabbika. Find joy for your soul to relieve your stress by what? By contemplating on the perfection of your Lord. Glorify your Lord. The soul thinking about how beautiful Allah is, how perfect Allah is, the might of Allah, the perfection of Allah. This will give the soul so much joy and so much happiness that it will become the means for relief. So he says to him this, and then he says to him, don't try to find relief in anything related to dunya. He says, وَلَا تَمُدَّنَّ عَيْنَيْكَ إِلَى مَا مَتَّعْنَا بِهِ أَزْوَاجًا مِّنْهُمْ زَهْرَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Do not look at what Allah gave many of them, from wife, children, wealth, women, this and that. Don't look at that, because that, first of all, is Zahra. Zahrat al-Hayat al-Dunya. Zahra means is a pleasure that is short-lived. How long does a Zahra or a flower or a rose live? Very short. So what they have is short-lived, and it is also لِنَفْتِينَهُمْ فِيهِ. It is going to be a type of pleasure that is always mixed with bitterness and hardships and difficulties. In this dunya, there is nothing that is from the pleasure of this dunya except that it is mixed with bitterness and hardships and difficulty. So it gives you a little bit of joy, but wrapped up with a lot of bitterness. So Allah tells the Prophet, he says, don't look at that. For relief, don't look at that. He says, وَرِزْقُ رَبِّكَ, what Allah provided you with, the knowledge, the revelation, your knowledge of Allah, you knowing Allah, you relating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. رِزْقُ رَبِّكَ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. Khayr in what way? Is better quality, gives the soul better joy, better pleasure. And abqa, meaning it lasts longer. The amount of relief you have from this knowledge lasts longer in your chest, lasts longer in your heart. Your soul enjoys that for longer time. This is indicating that also the dunya wise, the relief you get from experiencing good food, or good intimacy, or good whatever from this dunya, is always short-lived. And the minute it's gone, what's going to happen? You go back to how you were feeling before you had it. So Allah tells the Prophet ﷺ, if you want to find relief from the stress caused to you by the rejection of the believers, think of Allah. Think of the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will give you your soul and your heart the ultimate level of joy and delight. طيب. So this is what al-husn is. We spoke about al-husn, and I really would like you to take this idea, very powerful idea, life-changing really. If you give it the attention it deserves, it really can change the course of your life. So al-husn, beauty, is that which is observed either by the eyes or by the mind. That's what we're saying, right? And intellectual, smart people, they realize the difference between them, so they are striving and working hard towards the intellectual beauty. And less smart people, or less wise people, are engrossed in physical beauty. Going back to our hadith Jibreel alayhi salam, he said al-ihsan means to make something beautiful. Al-ihsan, this is what we're studying, sir. Al-ihsan, the question of Jibreel alayhi salam, أخبرني عن الإحسان, tell me about ihsan. What is ihsan? جعل الشيء حسنا مبهجا, to make something beautiful and delightful. That's the definition of ihsan, to make something beautiful and delightful. What it means is to perfect it. When something is beautiful, it must be perfect first. It has to be complete first. Nothing becomes beautiful unless it's first complete and has no shortcomings to it. So al-ihsan is a word that is synonymous to al-itqan, al-itqan, to perfect something. طيب? To perfect something. So when we speak about al-ihsan, we mean that we perfect the ibadah. We perfect the ibadah, and I will tell you more about that in a minute. Al-Hafidh, he says, when you speak about al-ihsan, ihsan can have two meanings. Either when you say ahsantu shay, ahsantu, use the word ihsan or the fi'l ahsana without a preposition. You know prepositions, to say you look at, you look for, you look after. For, at, and after are prepositions, right? And they change the meaning of the verb. When you say look at and look after, two different things, right? Caused by what? This difference caused by the preposition. So in Arabic, the same concept applies. Some verbs, they go without prepositions, and they go with one or more prepositions. But then in each different case, it will have a different meaning. Ihsan is one of them. When you say ahsana al-shay'a, without a preposition, it means perfected it. لكن أحسن إلى فلان, he showed beauty or showed ihsan, applied ihsan to somebody, means you showed kindness to them, you benefited them in some way. أوصل إليه النفع. أحسن إليه means أوصل إليه النفع. Does that make sense? So how many meanings we have? Two meanings. Ihsan, used without preposition, it means perfected something, al-itqan. أحسن الشيء, أحسن العمل, he perfected the deed. And you have al-ihsan with the preposition which is إلى, it means showed kindness or delivered some goodness to a person. So أحسن إلى أخيه, for example. أحسن إلى أخيه means he showed kindness or he benefited his brother. So in this hadith, which of the two is intended? Al-ihsan. Which of the two is intended? Huh? الأول. الأول is intended by it. طيب. The perfection of ibadah. However, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he says al-ihsan is also al-masdar, the root noun, which can apply to both. To al-ihsan, which means perfection, and ihsan, that means showing kindness. طيب. He says the hadith means perfection. However, we can also sense from it that there is an act of kindness as well. Can you sense in what way is that? He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, even though al-ihsan here primarily means to perfect the ibadah, but it also has the connotation of ihsan, delivering goodness to somebody. How is that? He says, because when one perfects their ibadah, they are showing kindness to themselves. When you perfect your ibadah, the more you perfect your ibadah, the more kindness you show to yourself. There is nothing that you can be kind to yourself with than perfecting the ibadah. The more you perfect the ibadah, the more kindness you show to yourself. Right? And the less you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more isa'ah, the more wronging you do to yourself. ظلم النفس. You will be wronging, oppressing, neglecting your nafs by not worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also the ulama, they commented on al-ihsan. Al-ihsan. Al-ihsan, here we have the alif lam. This is called al-ta'rif. Like the in English. The ihsan. The ihsan. And you usually use the word the or al-ihsan either about something that was previously mentioned. You speak about it. You say a man came, and then you say the man was hungry. So in the second instance in which you brought the word man again, use what? The. Because second time it is known. It's ma'rifah. It is known, and you and the listener, you know which man we're talking about. And that's why we use the. But in this hadith, they said al-ihsan was not mentioned previously. So why is it mentioned with al-ihsan? Right? So they said, and there's a benefit from this. They say al-ihsan, this is that is so known that you don't need to bring it previously in a conversation for one to know what you're talking about. It's the ihsan. Like when we speak about the sun. You know, the sun can come in our conversation, and we just give it the sun because everybody knows what sun we're talking about. There's only one sun. Right? And we can say the head teacher, and everybody know which head teacher that we're talking about. So when it is so known, it's called al-ahd al-dhihni. It is something that is known in the mind that you can bring it again and again with the word the in different conversations without previously mentioning it. Does that make sense? So here, what is being referred, the ulama, they say, Jibreel alayhi salam came, and the Sahaba radwanullahi alayhim, they heard the word ihsan so much in the Quran. And now they want to know, what is that ihsan? The ihsan spoke so highly of ihsan and muhsineen, the people of ihsan, and how much Allah loves them and how much Allah rewards them and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to give them in this dunya and in the akhirah. It makes you want to know, what is ihsan? I would like to know ihsan. So as if somebody read the Quran and read all these passages from the Quran in which Allah speaks about ihsan, 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 the muhsins, al-muhsineen, and the reward of them, and they became so eager to know. So Jibreel alayhi salam came to facilitate the knowledge of what ihsan is through this hadith. So he says, al-ihsan. In the Quran, there are few places in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions al-ihsan. What is al-ihsan? One of them, I will mention a couple. The first one is in Surah Yunus. Surah Yunus. This is chapter 10, verse 26. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةً. لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةً. For those who acted upon ihsan, whose ibadah was on the level of ihsan, whose connection with Allah was in the level of ihsan. الَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا. What is their reward? Allah says, for them, the people of ihsan, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى, the best of all rewards, Jannah. The highest rank of Jannah, al-Husna. And then he says, وَزِيَادَةً. And on top of it, there is something on top of Jannah. I'll come to that in a minute. وَلَا يَرْهَقُ وُجُوهَهُمْ قَتَرٌ وَلَا ذِلَّةٌ. And their faces will not be overcome with humility or, qatar. Qatar is this gloominess in the face. When one is stressed, you can see that they are stressed in their face. Even though they haven't frowned, they haven't, done anything particular, but you can see this gloominess in their faces. This is called qatar. Literally, it means some dust being on the face. But what it means, that a person is under stress. When you look at them, you can see this person is stressed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they will not be overcome in their faces. وَلَا يَرْهَقُ وُجُوهَ. Their faces will not be overcome or covered with either qatar وَلَا ذِلَّةٌ. Either this gloominess in their faces that reflects stress, or humility. They will not be disgraced in the Day of Judgment. And then he says, أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ الْجَنَّةِ. These are the people who are the companions of Jannah. The companions of Jannah, such that it's their friend and they are its friend. Like how friends, they never part from one another. These people, they will be in Jannah forever. And they will be like the companions, the friends of Jannah. أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ الْجَنَّةِ. And then he says, هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. They have an everlasting life therein. So he speaks here in a way that entices people to say, I want to become of those people. Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, in Jami' al-Ulum wal-Hikam, commenting on this hadith, he says, the commentary of the ulama of tafsir, they said ziyada here, they will have Jannah and something extra on top of it. What is this extra? He says this ziyada was interpreted by the Salaf as looking at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Looking at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a better reward than Jannah. there's more pleasure in looking at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than in experiencing all the physical pleasures of Jannah. So you look at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's just, you're looking, you're gazing, right? But Jannah has all the physical beauty, the physical attractions, the physical pleasures. All these, they fade in comparison with when it comes to the pleasure their souls have from gazing at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, this is suitable reward. This reward is quite suitable for the people of Ihsan. Why is that? He says, because the person of Ihsan, when they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they worship Him such that they are present in front of Him. Ihsan is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you are present in front of Him, and that will cause this person to perfect the ibadah. Whatever they do it sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they do it to perfection. That's how the people of Ihsan in dunya, they worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They worshipped Him, as the hadith says, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه, to worship Allah as if you can see Him, as if you are present in front of Him. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, because this is how they worshipped Allah in dunya, in the akhirah, it is only fair to make them see Allah. Because in dunya, they saw Him with their hearts. So in the akhirah, Allah rewards them by making them see Him with their eyes. May Allah make us with them, Ya Rabbi. And this idea in itself, it tells you what we were speaking about earlier. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that all the physical pleasures of dunya, they pale in comparison to what? To this intellectual beauty that you have only from gazing at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the same thing applies to this dunya. Yani this is the case of the people of Jannah in Akhirah. The same thing in dunya. Nothing in this dunya will give you any pleasure, my brothers, wallahi, like knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only knowing Him and feeling His companionship. Wherever you go, you feel that you are actually in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is watching you. Allah is talking to you. The only thing that separates you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just speaking to Him. The people of muraqabah, the muraqabah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are so close to Allah that whenever they want to speak to Him, they close their eyes, or even without that, they just say, Ya Allah, I know you can hear me. This is how close they are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how much pleasure they have from this sense of companionship. It gives them a lot of joy and pleasure. Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَعَكْسُ هَذَا, and the opposite of this, what Allah says in the Quran concerning the punishment of the people of disbelief. Do you know that? What, how long?
7:50 when we finish 8.
Okay. How long have you?
So 10 minutes late.
Okay. طيب. So Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, عكس هذا, the opposite of this, the opposite of the reward of the people of Jannah, Allah mentions as the punishment of the disbelievers in the fire of hell. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that إِنَّهُمْ عَنْ رَبِّهِمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ لَمَحْجُوبُونَ. They will be denied gazing at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the day of judgment. And then he says what? ثُمَّ إِنَّهُمْ لَصَالُ الْجَحِيمِ. Then after that, they had the second punishment, the second in rank, in terms of severity, is being in the fire of hell. What does that tell us? That being deprived from seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being denied to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is more of a punishment to their souls than the fire of hell itself. Just allow this to sink in, my brothers. Not being able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or being told that Allah hates them, Allah despises them, and they will never talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is more painful to their souls than the fire of hell itself. Okay? So the same thing applies for the hearts in this dunya. A heart in this dunya who is not accessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such that they don't know Allah, they don't know who Allah is, they don't think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is a cause of punishment for them than any hardship they may be experiencing in this dunya. Does that make sense? So in this dunya, I said the people who are disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously they will experience a lot of hardship in this dunya as a result of that. طيب? But all their hardships, all their difficulties, all their physical problems in this dunya, they are nothing compared to the pain they have in their hearts from not being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And they're not even aware of this.
And they're not even aware. They suffer the most internally.
Only those that are on the opposite path with
They realize this. But the people who are not in a journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they struggle a lot and they are in so much pain. And sadly, every time they think of a solution, the only solution they think about is what? The pleasures of this dunya. Let me eat, let me drink, let me enjoy intimacy, let me do this, let me do that, you know. But whatever they try, it doesn't work. Why? Because their torture is actually resulting from having very little to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or maybe none. They have no connection. Allah never crosses their mind. May Allah save us from this. Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, the people of the fire of hell are denied to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because this is how they were in dunya. In dunya, they never saw Allah. They never saw Allah. How did they not see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He says, جعل ذلك جزاء لحالهم في الدنيا وهو تراكم مران على قلوبهم حتى حجبت عن معرفته ومراقبته في الدنيا. He says, Allah made this the result of the sins they committed. And look, subhanAllah, how this ties in what we were saying earlier about the difference between the physical beauty and the spiritual beauty. And when one indulges in the physical beauty, what will happen to them, especially in the haram? It will extinguish the light of their souls, the light of their hearts. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that they have sinned so much that these sins, they created a layer on top of their hearts that prevents them from looking outward. They can't see. And like as if you have a windshield in your car and like snow or something covered it completely and you cannot see outside. So their hearts are in this state because of their sins, right? And as such, they don't see Allah in this dunya. They can't think of Him. They can't reflect on Him. They cannot feel His presence. They don't feel His companionship. And that's how they were in dunya. So in the akhirah, it's only fair that they don't see Allah as well in the akhirah. Right? But the point here is, you can see the people who have sinned. And when they sin, they indulge in physical beauty, the haram, the illegal physical beauty. And as a result of it, every time they indulge in such thing, it prevents them from looking at the spiritual beauty. So that's one passage from the Quran. The second passage, inshallah, from the Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions al-ihsan and the muhsins and the reward for them, which entice the Sahaba, and every Muslim that reads the Quran should make you feel that I want to become like this. I want to be one of those. One such passage from the Quran is Surah Al-Rahman. Surah Al-Rahman, chapter 55, verse 60. Chapter 55, Surah Al-Rahman, verse 60. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان? Isn't the reward of ihsan to be gifted and to be blessed with a lot of rewards? So here in this ayah, we have two words of al-ihsan. The first one means perfection. The second one means showing kindness and generosity. Both words of ihsan here, they mean the two possible meanings of ihsan. هل جزاء الإحسان is the reward of ihsan, perfecting ibadah. Anything other than being blessed and honored and shown graciousness and kindness. So ihsan, the second one was delivering goodness, delivering graciousness and kindness to a person.
In this verse.
In this verse, yeah, we have ihsan repeated twice. هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان. Right? And this came what? Came where, my brothers? Came in a surah or in a passage where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. And for the person who fears the watchfulness, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is present with them and watching them at all times, and therefore they perfect their ibadah, they have two beautiful gardens. وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّةً. And then he gave you about 10 or 11 pages, 11 verses describing the beauty of those two gardens. And then he says, وَمِن دُونِهِمَا جَنَّةً. And there are two other gardens, and that's why the ulama, they say, in Jannah can be split into 4 ranks. The upper 2 are for the people of Ihsan, and the lower 2 are for the people who have missed out on the rank of Ihsan. He says, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّةً, for the person who was mindful of Allah's watchfulness over them, al-Ihsan. They have 2 gardens, and he described them. And then after that he says, وَمِن دُونِهِمَا, and below them in quality, below them in beauty, is 2 other gardens. And when you look at the comparison, everything that was described in the previous 2 Jannah, you have a description that follows, which is less than the first description. The way the hur were described in the first 2 gardens is not like the way that they were described in the second garden, to show you they are of a superior quality. So this is in which the verse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, ihsan, you give ihsan, hal jaza'ul ihsani illa al-ihsan. Read Surah Al-Rahman, and it will motivate you in wanting to be of the people of ihsan. And when that happens, you will want to know, or you will appreciate Jibreel alayhi salam coming to ask about al-ihsan, to help you and I understand what ihsan is. طيب, so al-ihsan is basically perfecting one's knowledge of Allah. Perfecting one's knowledge of Allah such that they glorify Him more, they fear Him more, they love Him more, they become mindful of Him, and their minds and their hearts never depart from this idea. You know, wherever they talk, they walk, they think, they sit, they lie down, they are always mindful that I am not alone. Allah is with me, you know, watching me, seeing me. Whatever I do is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of. So with their knowledge of Allah, they never feel alone. They feel as if they are in the hadra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as they are in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the state of muraqabah. And obviously, when one thinks like this, what's going to happen? Their actions will be perfected. You know, it will be extremely difficult for them to sin. You know, they will have every reason to become sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They will have every reason to hang all their hopes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why you will find one of the narrators of this hadith narrated this hadith with a different wording. He says, al-ihsanu an takhsha Allah. An takhsha Allah. And we said khashya is what? Is to fear Allah out of your knowledge of Him. How is khashya, which means fear, and khawf, which also mean fear, how are they different? The ulama, they say khawf, which means fear, is the fear of something that you may not necessarily know. So you can use the word fear to say that I have fear of the dark, okay, or I have fear of something unknown. But you will never use the word khashya except in regards to something you know very well. Akhsha, say akhsha. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. The ones who truly have khashya from Allah is the people of knowledge. And he didn't use the word khawf, he used khashya, because the fear that results from knowing Allah is the greater rank. So that's why the ulama Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, once we read that he says fear is of 2 types. You know, you have khawf and khashya. And the people of khashya, they run away from Allah. When the people fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they run away from Him. They fear Him. They feel like distance from Him. But the people of khawf, like the people of khashya, they fear Allah, but with their knowledge of Him, they run to Him. they run to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says the difference between them is like the difference between someone, two people who become sick. Right? One of them has no knowledge of medicine, and that's why he resulted from just abstaining, staying away from food. You know, that you fast, you don't eat, you don't drink for a period of time, allowing your body to recover. Right? The other person who has knowledge of medicine, they knew what to take in order to recover from their sickness. He says the person who has knowledge of medicine is the example of the person who has khashya, ilm of Allah, and they know how to handle that to get closer to Him. And the person who just abstained from food and drink is the person who have khawf. They abstain and they don't come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a result of their fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think this suffices inshallah for today. I don't know how long we've been talking for. I lost track of time, but I think we covered quite a bit. I'll stop here inshallah. If you have any questions, any comments, I'm happy to listen to your questions inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Sorry, I just had a question. I don't know if I misunderstood. When we talk about the perfection, ihsan being perfection, and we talk about us getting to the state of perfection and us being human, can we really say we will get to a place where we'll be perfected as in terms of ibadah or knowledge, in terms of knowing Allah, or did I misunderstand this concept of ihsan as in meaning perfection?
I mean, let's begin. We will expand on this inshallah next week. But what we said here is perfection of ibadah will come later inshallah when we speak about the statement of Rasulullah when he says al-ihsan an ta'bud Allah. But for now we said al-ihsan is actually perfecting iman, perfecting your knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? When you are fully aware of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, you will end up feeling Him with you at all times. And in fact, subhanAllah, there's a hadith in which the Prophet he spoke about رجل زكى نفسه, he said, and then a man asked him, Rasulullah, وما تزكية النفس? What is تزكية النفس? You know, this is something important for us in our journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to show you that ihsan is actually one of your objectives, if not the objective. What do you aim at? What do you aim for in your journey of tazkiyah? Is to be in that state whereby you feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you at all times. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked about this. He said, a man asked him, وَمَا تَزْكِيَةُ النَّفْسِ? قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يعلم العبد أن الله عز وجل معه حيث كان. This is the ultimate objective for you to keep developing your knowledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep knowing Him. Keep getting to know Him more and more until you get to this point. أن تعلم أن الله عز وجل معك حيث كنت. To believe that Allah azza wa jalla is with you wherever you go. And obviously all of that will impact your actions, your thoughts, your inner state and your outer state. We will speak next week, my brother, inshallah, about ibadah. How ibadah comes into this. But the basic principle here is that ihsan is the perfection of your knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Did I miss anything you asked me for, my brother?
No, Jazakallah khair. Looking forward to it.
Barakallah feekum. May Allah reward you. And I'll see you next week, bi'idhnillah ta'ala.
That's Sheikh Abdullah.
That's Sheikh Abdullah.
Sheikh Abdullah, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. No, Sheikh.
Alhamdulillah, the internet is working all the way in Zanzibar, yeah? MashaAllah. What time is it over there, Akhi?
About 11 o'clock now.
We look forward to having you back, my brother, inshallah. May Allah preserve you and protect you, you and your family, wherever you may be, inshallah.
I had one question, actually.
Yes, my brother, what's your question?
It's regarding any advice you would suggest on trying to change your perception of beauty to turn it over from
physical.
to intellectual.
Just keep knowing, keep learning. You know, when you learn, the earlier stages of knowing, you are building your basics, your tools, you know. And once you have built enough of these tools, you will be able to get into the deeper end where deep knowledge exists. And that deep knowledge is the knowledge that intoxicates the mind. So beautiful and so delightful. It brings so much sweetness that it can intoxicate your mind. So the ulama, they say, just bear with the early stages where you are only learning the basics, you know, like the Arabic, the Nahu, the Sarf, you know, memorizing the Quran, learning the basic principles of Islam. You know, once you have covered the basics, and then you delve into the deeper end, and you'll find, subhanAllah, a lot of knowledge. A lot of knowledge that will be like mind-boggling, you know. Just thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what He does, and how the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in everything He says and everything He does. And you look at the perfection of His creation, the perfection of His actions. You know, just reflecting on simple things will make you feel you can't sleep at night sometimes. Just you're at awe. You know, you have seen something with your mind's eyes that intoxicates you, that prevented you from being able to fall asleep. You know, you can get to that level. And it's not far. You don't have to do that for long. Just bear with it in the earlier stages. And alhamdulillah, what we are trying to do in these classes, I don't know if you noticed this, we don't just limit ourselves with the basics. I try to take you the extra mile, and sometimes I try to stretch you a little bit with Arabic and the analysis. But this is what we're trying to do in these classes. We try to go to as far as we can, like we can go in the more deeper meanings, so that we can find that pleasure, so that it can motivate us, so that it can keep us going and moving and finding the pleasure of knowledge and attending these classes.
So the one I'm thinking is basically what comes to mind is basically, you know, like in school, for example, you had the people who are physical, into athletes, into sports, and then you had the people who are more intellectual, into the books. But this is different because it's applicable to everyone. It's not just people who are academics and people who are, it's for everyone. So
Yes. When you look at people who are highly motivated, you know, to do certain things, what you find motivating them is actually a thought. You know, sometimes you find a person who is into their business work, and you know they're an entrepreneur in this field or that field, and you feel how they are driven. If you stop them and ask them what motivates you, he says the image of me being amassing this amount of knowledge. That thought is a drive for them. So you can see thoughts, they can really make a person live in another world. Just believing in this one thought and having the details of it as clear as it can possibly be, it keeps you going, you know. And you find this person, subhanAllah, they can stay up at work for long hours, and they will leave the last person from the company, and then early in the morning they will be the first person to wake up. They had minimum amount of sleep, and the first to walk in the morning, you know. You'll be thinking, where is this motivation coming from? You know, what motivates them, which is different to other people, is an idea, an image they have in their heads. So don't undermine ideas and images. They can be really, really powerful in so many levels. وإياك إن شاء الله. The ulama, subhanAllah, sometimes they think of an instance, for example, in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the believers, كلوا واشربوا هنيئا بما أسلفتم في الأيام الخالية. Eat and drink resulting from what you have done in the past days, in dunya yani. And he says, if you allow this idea, just Allah speaking to you after you've been admitted to Jannah and telling you, eat and drink, my servant. This is for what you've done in dunya. Just this image, allow this image to soak your mind into this idea. You'll find you are ready to do anything so that you can be addressed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Jannah. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to admit you to Jannah and then tell you, كلوا واشربوا هنيئا بما أسلفتم في الأيام الخالية. So read the Quran, and you find the Quran can give you just one idea like this, and it can just, if you internalize this idea, a thought that will take you to another level, another world altogether. And then from that moment, you are ready to put sacrifices. You're no longer interested in things that you were interested in before. Now you are more driven, you are more focused, you know, because of what? One beautiful idea that's stuck to your head. And you don't want to lose out on it. Does that make sense? طيب يا brothers سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك واستغفر إن شاء الله سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Brother Sadiq.
No, I think there's a question on YouTube.
I'm sorry?
I think there's a question on YouTube.
Okay. Is this from Abdullah? For some
La-
reason, if you can see it, my brother, you read it out for us. I can't see the questions on YouTube for some reason.
No, subhanallah, I just closed it. Just give me a second. No, it says, Sheikh, does that mean anyone who did not reach the level of ihsan?
You can see it.
cannot be the Allah?
Yes, I can see it now. Does that mean anyone who did not reach the level of ihsan cannot see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? يعني Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have set this reward for the people who were able to see him. And the people who are able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in dunya, they were able to see him in different shades or different grades. So depending on how much of Allah they were able to see in this dunya, that they will see of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the akhirah. You know, everybody will take what they deserve. In one hadith, subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ says that the people who will sit around in circles around the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to indulge in seeing him, they will sit in circles, and these rows will be based on how close people used to sit near to the khatib in the day of Jum'ah. Authentic hadith. So depending on how close you are sitting close to the Imam in Jum'ah, that will impact how close you will be to sit around the throne of Allah to see him on the day of Jum'ah, where the people of Jannah come to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yawm al-Mazid. Why? Everything you did in this dunya will impact whether or not you will see Allah. And if you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how close, how much pleasure you will get out of that, depending on your actions in this dunya. I hope this makes sense, inshallah. And being in a state of ihsan, whereby one is able to feel Allah's presence, Allah's watchfulness around you. And when I say presence, his knowledge of you, his monitoring of you, his watchfulness of you. When you are able to sense that in the majority of the time, then you are in a state of ihsan. This doesn't mean that a person who is in a rank of iman or a rank of Islam, they never feel this. You'll find that they may feel it, but once in a blue moon. It's not the most common theme of their life. And the same thing with the person of ihsan. It doesn't mean that the person of ihsan is always thinking like this. Human nature, human weakness can take hold sometimes, but they are like this in the majority of the time. Okay? So the person of Islam, the person in the rank of Islam, can experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah's muraqabah, Allah's hadra, in some of the time. Right? The person who is in the rank of Iman, they experience it a little bit more than the person who is in the rank of Islam, but not as much as the person who is in the rank of Ihsan. The person in the rank of Ihsan, they live like that in the vast majority of the time. So depending on how much that you experience in this dunya, how much of that you will also experience in the akhirah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us with the people of Ihsan. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullahu khairan, and I hope to see you all next week here with ta'ala in person or online. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.